Hello, math students. Welcome back to Module 3, Rational Numbers. This is Lesson 2, and it is called The Opposite of a Number. So the title for Lesson 2 is The Opposite of a Number. The goal that we have for today is, today we will work with the opposite of a number and what that means. The question that I want you to think about during this lesson is, what does the word opposite mean? All right, so things to know. The way we're going to get started with today's lesson is we're going to play a little game that's called What is the Opposite? And so your job is when I say the word, you have to tell me what the opposite is. So the opposite of not is the what is what? Is. Okay? Not or do not. No, I think the word, like if I say it is not hot, then you would say it is hot. So I'm saying the word is the opposite. The opposite of summer would be winter. The opposite of salt is pepper. The opposite of in is out. The opposite of up is down. And the opposite of left is right. And I'm actually going to change this first one because that really didn't make any sense. I think it was a typo by me. I'm thinking it was supposed to say hot, not. Okay, what is the opposite of hot? Cold. So that helps us understand it better. So the opposite of hot is cold. The opposite of summer is winter. The opposite of salt is pepper. This makes much more sense. Sorry, kiddos. The opposite of in is out. The opposite of up is down. And the opposite of left is right. Okay, so those are all words that we know that are the opposites because they describe the opposite of that specific word. Well, in math, we have the same thing, except for sometimes in math, it is a little bit tricky to tell if you're not following what the word pattern says. That's the only time it gets tricky, and I'll show you what I'm talking about in just a minute. So 0 is the most special thing when we're dealing with opposites because 0 is its own opposite. It is not positive or negative, and 0 is the starting point for all numbers. So when we say the opposite of 0, the answer has to be 0. So the opposite of 0 is 0. Okay? Now, if we were to fill in this number line, so I would say, let's fill it in on this side. So this is 0, and I'm going to say 1. The opposite of 1 is negative 1. Okay, then I'm going to say this is 2. The opposite of 2 is negative 2. This is 3. The opposite of 3 is negative 3. This is 4. The opposite of 4 is negative 4. This is 5. The opposite of 5 is negative 5. And this is 6. And the opposite of 6 is negative 6. So what we have just done on all of these accounts is we figured out what the opposite of the number is. So if I tell you a number and ask you for the opposite, you're going to tell me what it is. So 2, what is the opposite of 2? Negative 2. Okay, what is the opposite of 4? Negative 4. Now, some of you are sitting there going, Mrs. Nelson, duh, this is so easy. Well, the reason why I want you to be able to do this is because you actually use the number line to determine the opposite. And let me show you what I'm talking about. If I tell you that the number was 1, then you always start at 0 and you would go to 1. If you're trying to find the opposite of 1, you have to travel the same amount of distance. So from 0 to 1, I went 1 hop to the right. Well, the opposite of that would be to go 1 hop to the left. And when I go 1 hop to the left, I get negative 1. So the opposite of 1 is negative 1. Well, I could also do that the other way. I could say, okay, what if I give you the number is negative 5? Okay, so we always start at 0. I'm going over to negative 5, and I say to myself, okay, it is, count the hops, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hops from 0, and then I ask you what is the opposite of that. You're going to go 5 hops from 0 to the other direction. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Where do I end up? At 5. So I know the opposite of negative 5 is 5 because they're both 5 hops from 0. This is 5 hops, and this is 5 hops. So whenever you're trying to find the opposite of a number, you have to count the number of hops that number is from 0 and then go in the opposite direction that same number of hops. So on the first one, we went 1 hop to the right. The opposite of that is 1 hop to the left. And that's how you find the opposite. And you do that for everything that you're being asked. So the distance from 0 determines the opposites. And that makes sense when you see a picture of it. Okay, so now let's do this. What is the opposite of these? Well, I hop on at 0. I go up to 5. I realize that it's 5 hops, so now I have to get back on 0, and I have to go 5 hops in the opposite direction. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I end up sitting at -5. That one was easy because we just did it. Okay, well, what if you're doing -10? Hop on 0, and I go to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm sitting at -10. So now I have to go to the right 10 hops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I stop at +10. So I now know that the opposite of -10 is 10 because it's 10 hops from 0 in the opposite direction. Okay, now let's do -3. So I hop on the number line. 1, 2, 3. I went 3 hops to the left. So in order to find the opposite, I go 3 hops to the right. 1, 2, 3. And I end up with an answer of +3. Okay, 15, same thing, hop on 0. I go 15 hops to the right, so I have to do that same thing, going 15 hops to the left, and I end up at -15. Okay, I think you guys are starting to see the pattern. So remember that the opposite is the number of hops from 0 in the opposite direction. So if I'm going on -100, hop on 0, going -100 hops. When I get there, I realize the opposite of that would be 100 hops to the right, and so the opposite of -100 is 100. Okay? So the number line is a very helpful tool to help us find the opposites of these. Lots of you are sitting in your head going, I don't need the number line. But remember, one thing that we're doing with this class is we're learning why things work or why things happen, and that explains to you why those work. All right, so the next thing that I need you to do is I need you to tell me the answers to what happens when. So we're going to play this little thing that's called What Happens When, and it says you take the opposite of 2, then the opposite of that number, and what happens? So the number is 2, right? You're given the number 2, and then you're supposed to take the opposite of that. So the number is 2. Here's the number, right? What is the opposite of 2? If you said -2, you are correct. So this is the opposite of the given number. So the opposite of 2 is -2. And then this guy right here is the opposite of the opposite. That's crazy. I know. Think about it. So you're given a number, 2. What is the opposite? -2. What is the opposite of the opposite? 2. Okay, interesting. Let's try it again. What if you are given the number 8? You take the opposite of 8 and then the opposite of that number. So you're given the number 8. So this is the number. Okay. What is the opposite of 8? -8. You are correct. And then what is the opposite of -8? 8. So 8 is the opposite of the opposite. Interesting. I wonder if it works for all of them. Because so far we started out with 2 positive numbers. I wonder if it works the other way. So let's see. You take the opposite of -5 and then the opposite of that number. Okay, so our number is -5. Number is -5. What is the opposite of -5? 5. Good. So this is the opposite. And then what is the opposite of 5? -5. So this is the opposite of the opposite. Interesting. Okay, so now we get to come up with a rule. And the rule that we learned is, so we can say that the opposite of the opposite is the number itself. Interesting. Say that again. The opposite of the opposite is the number itself, and that means the number that you start with. Okay, so if I started with 2, the opposite of the opposite is 2. Hey! Start with 8, the opposite of the opposite is itself. Start with -5, the opposite of the opposite is itself. So if we start with A, this is what we started with right here. This is what we started with right here, A. And then we take the opposite of A, which gives us -A. And then we take the opposite of -A, and what do we end up with? Exactly what we started with. Okay? So that's kind of cool, isn't it? Let's try another number, because I like the numbers. The numbers might help us. Okay, so let's say, what if the number is 25? What is the opposite of 25? Isn't it -25? And then if we take the opposite of -25, what do we end up with? 25. So it kind of works, right? Because we give you the number itself right there. Take the opposite of that, which is -25. Take the opposite of the whole thing and start back with what the number you started with. Does it work with negatives? Let's see. Let's try this one. What if we had -12 is what we started with? Well, if you take the opposite of -12, it gives you a +12, right? And then you take the opposite of that, and it makes you end up with -12 again. Okay? So that's kind of interesting. You're going to learn some more about this in a little while, but I'll just let that sit and have you think about that for a minute. Okay, so let's go back to our goal. Our goal for today is, today we will work with the opposite of a number and what that means, which is what we just did. What does the word opposite mean? Hopefully, numerically, mathematically, I would like you to answer that question. What does the word opposite mean? All right, kiddos, that's all I have for you today. Talk to you soon. Bye.